Mr. Bourla, can I ask you, when did you know that the vaccines didn't stop transmission? How long did you know that without saying it publicly?
Thank you very much.
I'm sorry. Answer that question. I mean, we now know that the vaccines didn't stop transmission, but why did you keep it secret? You said it was 100% effective, then 90%, then 80%, then 70%. But we now know that the vaccines do not stop transmission. Why did you keep that secret?
Have a nice day.
I won't have a nice day until I know the answer. Why did you keep it a secret that your vaccine did not stop transmission?
That was Rebel News' Ezra Levant questioning Pfizer CEO Albert Bourla at the World Economic Forum last week. Quick caveat, Rebel News has faced criticism in the past for its reporting over the 2017 Charlottesville riots. However, that clip has gone viral. And on the issue of vaccine efficacy, Bourla told CNBC's The Exchange back in 2021 that the vaccine's initial studies showed it protected people 100% of the time against hospitalization, but that it falls to low 90% and mid to high 80% after 6 months. So I think that question was a perfectly valid question to ask the CEO of Pfizer. The implication, the early implication being that the vaccines were not just helping with severe illness and death, but also transmission. That no longer holds up. And, Pfizer got government contracts. They're working to get the vaccine scheduled so it'll be protected from liability, possibly also required in some circumstances, schools and other things. It seems like a worthwhile question to ask the CEO at this gathering of influential, wealthy people from private business and from governments, et cetera. The common man is not really allowed into Davos. So there you have a journalist, maybe a confrontational journalist, maybe one from an outlet that a lot of people don't like, but asking a question that I think is perfectly valid. And of course, he has nothing to say.
Yeah, it was an absolutely valid question. He asked it in a very polite way. I mean, this seems like the Canadian version of confrontational, right? I will not be having a good day until you answer my question. I thought that was just a great moment of journalism and really showed up the cowardice, the refusal of the CEO of Pfizer to answer the question. The point was made. The point was made, and it was made in a way that, I think. Again, the theme of this show today has been a way that I really hope liberals, leftists, people who supported, even Pfizer having, protection from liability, let's say, because they thought it was so important, Operation Warp Speed to get these vaccines out, a moment that, even people who maybe supported that could say, that is a question they should have to answer. That is a question they should have to answer perhaps before Congress. That is a question that the American people deserve an answer to. And
I absolutely agree with you. And it's so interesting that the central theme of Davos, which we talked about on the show a lot last week, was the harm of disinformation. I'm sure you paid attention to that panel hosted by Brian Stelter, whose former show on CNN. You and I have both been on it, where he interviewed a number of people about the central harm of disinformation. And it was alarmist about how bad it is for society allowing people to say things that might be wrong or untrue or exaggerated on Facebook and on Twitter and on YouTube, and how we can't ever have society can't function until we fix that problem. They said all the other problems being discussed at Davos are linked to that problem. And okay, and here you have a question being put to someone who propagated a falsehood about the vaccines. Elites propagated that falsehood. And that was ended up being disinformation. And so they never turn this disinformation framing on themselves and talk about all the way that the mainstream or the elite or the health officials in the government, how all of those people got things wrong. Not always, not everything they said was wrong, but sometimes it was wrong. And the problems that caused. It's always framed as you, the person scrutinizing them, the things you got wrong or might have shared that were wrong. That's this disaster for society. But when we get things wrong, that's not worth talking about?
Yeah, disinformation has become the new accusation of racism. The word elites used to silence scrutiny and criticism of what of the things that are in their economic interests, right? So you had A.G. Salzberger sitting there saying, the biggest threat to media credibility is disinformation, right? Couldn't possibly be that the biggest threat to the New York Times is credibility, is anything the New York Times did to squander its credibility, right? It has to be some nefarious, evil external force that impugns the motives and the character of the people demanding accountability on behalf of powerful elites. They always have to find a new way to silence critique, ostensibly in the name of some higher virtue, and they seem to have found it here. And yes, you guys did a great segment on the woman who responded to Brian Stelter by saying, I hope one day soon it will be, misinformation and hate speech will be illegal in America. Mm-hmm. The thing that, honestly, I'm sure a lot of our viewers are well aware of this, but, this we don't call this the greatest country and the most free country on earth for nothing. The thing that makes us so wildly above European countries is that we have a First Amendment. We very much value our freedom of expression, but our elites really don't. They really don't have the same yen and heart for freedom of expression, because it means it gives average people, regular, normal people, the right to talk back, the right to have their own opinions, the right to say, look, just because you're richer than me doesn't make you more right or give you the right to tell me how to live my life.
Mm-hmm. And she, the person you're talking about who made that comment, the speech regulator on behalf of the European Union, if you listen to her full remarks, she was actually more kind of moderate or open-minded on the question of how much censorship is too much. Obviously, I would say I would draw that line way differently than her. Yeah. But she was more nuanced on the subject than the publisher of the New York Times. He was the most alarmed of all. He was the one very explicitly saying that, look, we need a regime where Facebook prioritizes content from places like, maybe the New York Times instead of others. And that's what we have to do. I found that very telling.
Yeah, it's telling and it's terrifying. And, this handshake agreement, this sort of between, the deep state, social media companies, and liberal media outlets, it's bad. It's really, really bad. And, honestly, it makes you really think like, so you take a place like the Daily Wire, right? And they're consistently ranked sort of highest. You get Facebook's top 10 stories every day. 7 of them are Ben Shapiro says this, Ben Shapiro says that. You imagine how much more reach he would have if all of these, forces were not operating in order to try to limit it. I mean, there's just so much appetite among the American people for just normal points of view that they will not get from, these more established liberal media outlets that have a very straightforward narrative, and it's very clearly identified with one side of the political spectrum in America.
I should mention, I did see 2 or 3 times over the last few days something go viral on Twitter that was a screenshot of like a slide at the World Economic Forum, or an alleged slide at the World Economic Forum, or something on their agenda, or something that people there believe that turned out to be that was fake. So this is an issue, and people, please stop sharing. Please stop falling for fake content. Or if you accidentally share something that's fake, delete it. Because then, on the comments, on the replies, you have people after people saying, this is actually made up. And then some people say, well, it sounds like something they might think. You do not come off good when you do that. We can criticize the actual things these people think without making up things. It's never a good look. So do be on the lookout, for some of that stuff.
For misinformation, if you will.
Yeah.
I will also say I'm sort of the camp that, this is sort of a distraction. I mean, obviously it's delicious to pour over, these elites exposing themselves and saying the quiet part out loud and admitting, the collusion between all of these larger forces. But at the end of the day, I really don't feel that the World Economic Forum itself is having a deep impact on American public life. I think that our, elites have way too much power, way too much political power, and way too much money. And they tend to go there. But, if that whole organization sort of dropped into the ocean, we would still be having the same culture wars in America, the same battles, the same class divide. It's more a symptom of our class divide than a cause. And I think a lot of people see it as sort of like a cause, as, some sort of where they machinate and when they come up with the ploy to how to hurt the working class. And it's no, that's all happening, at a very individual level, often very unconsciously. And we can fight it at an individual level. For example, after disinformation, I noticed climate, of course, was like the #1 topic you heard a lot about coming out of Davos. Republican legislators, even at the local level, have proven very powerful and adept at fighting more extremist climate agendas. And so that gives me a lot of hope. And I do see the kind of, I hope when people focus on this and share this stuff, they're doing it in the spirit of like, gosh, look at these idiots, and not in the spirit of, my God, they control everything, because I think that would be a little bit of a mistake.
Wise words. All right, we'll have more Rising right after this. Stay tuned.